Chapter 4. The Slave Trade. 300 years ago, no Negroes were to be found in this Western Hemisphere. We were to be found exclusively in Africa. Just about that time, a large number of white people, called colonists, settled in America. They desired laborers to help them in the country's development. They turned to Asia and were unable to use the yellow man. At that time, a man named John Hawkins, afterwards knighted, asked permission of Queen Elizabeth of England to take the blacks from America into her colonies of America and the West Indies and use them in their development. The Queen asked, "What consideration will you give them?" Hawkins said, "They will be civilized and Christianized in the colonies, for in their own country they are savages and barbarians." Under these pretenses, the British Queen signed a charter empowering John Hawkins and others to remove from Africa millions of our foreparents, men, women, and children, who were sold in the slave markets of the southern states of America and the West Indies. Parents were separated from children, husbands from wives, all scattered in this Western Hemisphere to work in the cotton fields of the southern states of America and the sugar plantations of the West Indies. The Negroes who were sold in the West Indies remained as slaves for 230 years, and those sold in America for 250 years. The West Indian Negroes were emancipated 85 years ago by Queen Victoria of England, and the American Negroes 58 years ago by Abraham Lincoln. We, the Negroes in this Western Hemisphere, are descendants of those Africans who were enslaved and transported to these shores, where they suffered, bled, and died to make us what we are today, civilized, Christian free men. Should we not, therefore, turn our eyes toward Africa, our ancestral home, and free it from the thraldom of alien oppression and exploitation? Negroes' status under alien governments. Within modern times, the Negro race has not had any real statesmen, and the masses of our people have always accepted the intentions and actions of the statesmen and leaders of other races as being directed in our interest as a group in conjunction with the interest of others. Such a feeling on our part caused us to believe that the Constitution of the United States was written for Negroes, as well as the constitutions of England, France, Italy, Germany, and other countries where Negroes happen to have their present domicile, either as citizens or as subjects. That we suffer so much today, under whatsoever flag we live, is proof positive that constitutions and laws, when framed by the early advocates of human liberty, never included and were never intended for us as a people. It is only a question of sheer accident that we happen to be fellow citizens today with the descendants of those who, through their advocacy, descendants laid the foundation for human rights. So this brings us to the point where, as a people, we can expect very little from the efforts of present-day statesmen of other races, in that their plans, as far as advantages to be derived therefrom are concerned, are laid only in the interest of their own people, and not in the interest of Negroes. Hence, it is imperative that Negroes as a people evolve just at this time a statesmanship sufficiently able to cope with the designs and the movements that are being made that will, except we prevent it, ultimately mean our doom and destruction. The Negro as an industrial makeshift. The Negro's prosperity today, limited as it is based upon the foundation laid by an alien race that is not disposed to go out of its way to prepare for the economic existence of anyone else but itself. Therefore, our present prosperity as far as employment goes is purely accidental. It is as accidental today as it was during the War of 1914 to 1918, when colored men were employed in different occupations, not because they were wanted, but because they were filling the places of men of other races who were not available at that time. Negroes are still filling places, and as time goes on and the age grows older, our occupations will be gone from us. Because those for whom we filled the places will soon appear, and as they do, we shall gradually find our places among the millions of permanent unemployed. The thing for the Negro to do, therefore, is to adjust his own economic present in readiness for the future. A race that is solely dependent upon another for its economic existence sooner or later dies. As we have in the past been living upon the mercies shown us by others and by the chances obtainable, and have suffered therefrom, so will we in the future suffer if an effort is not made now to adjust our own affairs. Lack of cooperation in the Negro race. It is so hard, so difficult to find men who will stick to a purpose, who will maintain a principle for the worth of that principle, for the good of that purpose. And if there is a race that needs such men in the world today, God Almighty knows it is the race of which I am a member. The race needs men of vision and ability, men of character, and above all, men of honesty, and that is so hard to find. The greatest stumbling block in the way of progress in the race has invariably come from within the race itself. The monkey wrench of destruction, as thrown into the cog of Negro progress, is not thrown so much by the outsider as by the very fellow who is in our fold, and who should be the first to grease the wheel of progress rather than seeking to impede it. But notwithstanding the lack of sympathetic cooperation, I have one consolation, that I cannot get away from the race, and so long as I am in the race, and since I have sense and judgment enough to know what affects the race affects me, it is my duty to help the race to clear itself of those things that affect us in common. White man's solution for the Negro problem in America. Immediately after the signing of the Emancipation Proclamation in America, the white man started to think how he could solve the new problem of the Negro. He saw that the Negro could not be slaughtered by wholesale killing, and that it would be a blot on American civilization. He therefore had to resort to some means of solving the problem, which meant the extinction of the Negro in America. The plan he decided on was as follows. Now that America is undeveloped and we have but 34 million in population, 30 million being white and 4 million black, a number not large enough to develop the country as we want it, we will use the 4 million blacks until we have built up the country sufficiently, and when we no longer need their labor, we will throw them off and let them starve economically and die of themselves, or emigrate elsewhere, we care not where, then no one can accuse us of being inhuman to the Negro, as we shall not have massacred him. A hearty welcome is extended to white people from all parts of the world to come to and settle in America. They come in by the thousands every month. Why? The idea is to build up a vast white population in America, so as to make the white people independent of Negro labor, thereby depriving them of the means of livelihood, the wherewithal to buy bread, which means that in a short while they will die of starvation. Those of us who study industrial conditions among the race must have noticed that Negroes in America have been thrown out of jobs that they occupied formerly, and their positions taken by European immigrants. Now, if the white people have not reached the apex of their intention industrially, as far as the development of the country is concerned, and they have exhibited such a degree of prejudice since they started their plan, how much more prejudiced will they not become in the next 100 years, when their population will be doubled by emigration and birth rate? This is the problem the Negro has to face in America. The true solution of the Negro problem. As far as Negroes are concerned, in America we have the problem of lynching, peonage, and disfranchisement. In the West Indies, South and Central America, we have the problem of peonage, serfdom, industrial and political governmental inequality. In Africa we have not only peonage and serfdom, but outright slavery, racial exploitation, and alien political monopoly. We cannot allow a continuation of these crimes against our race. As 400 million men, women, and children, worthy of the existence given us by the divine Creator, we are determined to solve our own problem by redeeming our motherland Africa from the hands of alien exploiters, and found there a government, a nation of our own, strong enough to lend protection to the members of our race scattered all over the world, and to compel the respect of the nations and races of the earth. Do they lynch Englishmen, Frenchmen, Germans, or Japanese? No. And why? Because these people are represented by great governments, mighty nations and empires, strongly organized, yes, and ever ready to shed the last drop of blood and spend the last penny in the national treasury to protect the honor and integrity of a citizen outraged anywhere. Until the Negro reaches this point of national independence, all he does as a race will count for naught, because the prejudice that will stand out against him, even with his ballot in his hand, with his industrial progress to show, will be of such an overwhelming nature as to perpetuate mob violence and mob rule, from which he will suffer, and which he will not be able to stop with his industrial wealth and with his ballot. You may argue that he can use his industrial wealth and his ballot to force the government to recognize him, but he must understand that the government is the people, that the majority of the people dictate the policy of governments, and if the majority is against a measure, a thing, or a race, then the government is impotent to protect that measure, thing, or race. If the Negro were to live in this Western Hemisphere for another 500 years, he would still be outnumbered by other races who are prejudiced against him. He cannot resort to the government for protection, for government will be in the hands of the majority of the people who are prejudiced against him. Hence, for the Negro to depend on the ballot and his industrial progress alone will be hopeless, as it does not help him when he is lynched, burned, Jim Crowed, and segregated. The future of the Negro, therefore, outside of Africa, spells ruin and disaster. White propaganda about Africa. This propaganda of disassociating Western Negroes from Africa is not a new one. For many years, white propagandists have been printing tons of literature to impress scattered Ethiopia, especially that portion within their civilization, with the idea that Africa is a despised place inhabited by savages and cannibals, where no civilized human being should go, especially black civilized human beings. This propaganda is promulgated for the cause that is being realized today. That cause is colonial expansion for the white nations of the world. At the present time, the world is not producing enough food to feed all its inhabitants. The strong are fed and the weak starve. That is why there are famines in certain countries, even though those countries produce certain things for human consumption. The strong go there and take the food and send it home, just as how Great Britain and France go into Africa, take out the products and ship them away to feed Europeans and leave Africans to starve. The strong will always live at the expense of the weak. This rush for territory, this encroachment on lands, is only a desire of the strong races, especially the white race, to get hold of those portions and bits of lands necessary for their economic existence, knowing well that in another 200 years there will not be enough supplies in the world for all of its inhabitants. The weaker peoples must die. At present, Negroes are the weakest people, and if we do not get power and strength now, we shall be doomed to extermination. The three stages of the Negro in contact with the white man. I believe, as far as the Negro is concerned politically, that there are three stages relating to our contact with the white man. The first stage in the life of the Negro in this Western Hemisphere was the stage when the white man shackled us in Africa and brought us here and kept us for 250 years. During this period, we worked and received no recompense, no pay for our labor, and we were satisfied because of the white man's Christian teaching. Learn to labor and to wait. The second stage was the thing called emancipation, which we have enjoyed for 58 years. This stage came when they gave us partial freedom and a petty existence by way of wages. And we were satisfied during that stage to do just what they told us to do. We worked for small wages and voted Republican, Democratic, and so forth, until after 58 years we discovered that a change was necessary. Now we have entered into the third stage of our existence, wherein we say to the white man, after 250 years of slavery and 58 years of partial freedom under your leadership, we are going to try but 50 years under our own direction. This new stage calls for all the manhood within the race and means that we must throw off all the conditions that affected us in the first and second stages and go out and acquit ourselves like men in the economic, industrial, and political arena. Booker T. Washington's program. The world held up the great sage of Tuskegee, Booker T. Washington, as the only leader for the race. They looked forward to him and his teachings as the leadership for all times, not calculating that the industrially educated Negro would himself evolve a new ideal after having been trained by the sage of Tuskegee. The world satisfied itself to believe that succeeding Negro leaders would follow absolutely the teachings of Washington. Unfortunately, the world is having a rude awakening. and that we are evolving a new ideal. The new ideal includes the program of Booker T. Washington and has gone much further. Things have changed wonderfully since Washington came on the scene. His vision was industrial opportunity for the Negro, but the sage of Tuskegee has passed off the stage of life and left behind a new problem, a problem that must be solved, not by the industrial leader only, but by the political and military leaders as well. If Washington had lived, he would have had to change his program. No leader can successfully lead this race of ours without giving an interpretation of the awakened spirit of the new Negro, who does not seek industrial opportunity alone, but a political voice. The world is amazed at the desire of the new Negro, for with his strong voice he is demanding a place in the affairs of the world. Belief that the race problem will adjust itself, a fallacy. Some of our leaders in the Negro race flatter themselves into believing that the problem of black and white in America will work itself out, and that all the Negro has to do is to be humble, submissive, and obedient, and everything will work out well in the sweet by and by. But the keen student will observe this, that a terrible mistake was made between 40 and 50 years ago when black men were elected to legislative assemblies all over the country, especially in the southern states, and even at the national capital when representatives of this race occupied seats in Congress. The mistake was made as far as the white people were concerned. There was a state of disorganization in the nation, and in that state, certain things happened by mere chance. In the chance, dozens of black men became senators and congressmen. This opened up to the eyes of the white nation the possibility of the black man governing the white man in these United States of America. The possibility of the black man making laws to govern the white man? This possibility drove them almost to madness, in suddenly rejecting the spirit of the Constitution and the Declaration of Lincoln that all men are created equal. Hence, a determination was arrived at that never again would it be possible for the race of slaves to govern the race of masters within these United States of America. Some of us believe that this slave race of ours will live in the United States of America and in the future again become lawmakers for the white race, our slave masters of 60 years ago. Nothing of the kind has happened in all human history. There is not one instance where a slave race living in the same country, within the same bounds as the race of masters that enslaved them, and being in numbers less than the race of masters, has ever yet ruled and governed the masters. It has never been so in history, and it will never be so in the future. The hidden spirit of America is determined that it shall never be, caring not what hopes and promises we get. But history has recorded where a race of slaves, through evolution, through progress, has risen to the heights where they ruled and dominated those who once enslaved them. But that race of slaves has always had to betake itself to other habitats, usually their own native land, and there, apart from those who once enslaved them, developed a power of their own, a strength of their own, and in the higher development of that strength and of that power, they, like others, have made conquests, and the conquests sometimes have enabled them to enslave those who once enslaved them. So for us to encourage the idea that one day Negroes will rise to the highest in the administration of this white government is only encouraging a vain hope. The only wise thing for us as ambitious Negroes to do is to organize the world over and build up for the race a mighty nation of our own in Africa. And this race of ours that cannot get recognition and respect in the country where we were slaves, by using our own ability, power, and genius, would develop for ourselves in another country, in our habitat, a nation of our own, and be able to send back from that country, from the native habitat, to the country where we were once enslaved, representatives of our race that will get as much respect as any other ambassadors from any other race or nation. Examples of white Christian control of Africa. The world has seen many fair examples of white Christian control of Africa. The outrages of Leopold of Belgium, when he butchered thousands of our defenseless brothers and sisters in the Belgian Congo and robbed them of their rubber. The natives of Kenya, Southeast Africa, armed with sticks and stones, rebelled against the injustices and brutality of the English and were hewn down by machine guns because they did not supply the demands of the invaders. The Hottentots of Southwest Africa, in rebellion against similar brutality and exploitation, using spears and leather shields to protect themselves, were bombed from airplanes by the Christian whites. The above are but few examples of the many atrocities committed on our defenseless brothers and sisters in Africa by white exploiters and invaders. Surely the introduction of chemical gas among the natives of Africa would place them in a better position to handle the alien disturbers of African peace. It strikes me that with all the civilization this Western Hemisphere affords, Negroes ought to take better advantage of the cause of higher education. We could make of ourselves better mechanics and scientists, and in the cases where we can help our brothers in Africa by making use of the knowledge we possess, it would be but our duty. If Africa is to be redeemed, the Western Negro will have to make a valuable contribution along technical and scientific lines. The thought behind their deeds. Behind the murder of millions of Negroes annually in Africa is the well-organized system of exploitation by the alien intruders who desire to rob Africa of every bit of its wealth for the satisfaction of their race and the upkeep of their bankrupt European countries. If we of the Western world take no interest in the higher development of the African natives, it will mean that in another 100 years historians and writers will tell us that the black man once inhabited Africa, just as the North American Indian once inhabited America. But those of us who lead are well versed in Western civilization and are determined that the black man shall not be a creature of the past, but a full-fledged man of the present, and a power to be reckoned with in the future. Similarity of persecution. Christ came into the world centuries ago to redeem lost mankind. From the age of 12 to his crucifixion, he taught the doctrine of salvation without fear of the great and mighty ones of his day. But his fellow Jews became jealous of his success and sought means to get rid of him. They argued among themselves, saying, "How can we do it? We have no power, no judges, and if we lay hands upon him, he will have us apprehended by the Roman authorities. The best thing we can do is to frame him up." So they made certain statements to the Roman government which had Jesus incarcerated, while his brother Jews shouted with joy as they had accomplished their desire. When Jesus was brought to trial, Pontius Pilate, the governor, did not care to send him to prison, as he had not interfered with the honor and reputation of any Roman citizen, and the Romans were not jealous of the work of this Jew. But the Jews who were jealous of Christ said, "This man is preaching against Caesar and the state. He is preaching the doctrine of rebellion among the peaceful Jews and citizens of the state. If you do not convict this man, you are not a friend of Caesar." Pilate, being thus forced against his will, was compelled to decide against Jesus, even though he knew that Jesus had done no wrong. After he was condemned, Pilate still hoped to get his conscience clear by letting Jesus go, and that he, Pilate, was empowered to release one criminal on feast day. When the time came for the condemned men to be crucified, Pilate asked them to choose between Barabbas the robber and Jesus, whom they called the King of the Jews. And they cried, "Crucify Jesus, and let Barabbas go." Pilate said, "What evil hath he done?" But they cried the more, "Crucify him." So we have a relative position at this time. Selfish, jealous Negroes know they can do nothing to impede the progress of the Universal Negro Improvement Association, and if left alone, we will go on organizing Negroes throughout the world. So they say, "We cannot handle Garvey and his organization, as we have no power. Let us go to the state and federal authorities and frame him up. Let us say he is an anarchist, a seditionist, and is speaking against the government." Like the Jews of old, they cry, "Crucify him," or rather, "Send him to prison, deport him." During Christ's sojourn on earth, he taught many lessons. Among them, "Blessed are they which are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." This declaration has inspired men through all ages to make their sacrifice in the cause of human liberty. When we recount the many noble deeds of the heroes and martyrs of the various nations and races of the world, who have sacrificed their lives in the cause of freedom, we will readily realize that this declaration of Christ has proved itself true. Through the sacrifice of Jesus and the yielding up of his life on Calvary's cross, the world today has caught an inspiration that will live forever. In the time when he taught his doctrine, few men believed in and followed him. But after the lapse of centuries, we find that Christianity has become the greatest moral force in the world. And as with Christianity, so with every great human movement taught under similar circumstances. May we not say to ourselves that the doctrine Jesus taught, that of redeeming mankind, is the doctrine we ourselves must teach in the redemption of our struggling race? Let us therefore cling fast to the great ideal we have before us. This time it is not the ideal of redeeming the world, such as was the ideal of Jesus, but it is the ideal of redeeming and saving 400 million souls who have suffered for centuries from the persecution of alien races. As Christ, by his teachings, his sufferings, and his death, triumphed over his foes through the resurrection, so do we hope that out of our sufferings and persecutions of today, we will triumph in the resurrection of our newborn race. Shall the Negro be exterminated? The Negro now stands at the crossroads of human destiny. He is at the place where he must either step forward or backward. If he goes backward, he dies. If he goes forward, it will be with the hope of a greater life. Those of us who have developed our minds scientifically are compelled by duty to step out among the millions of the unthinking masses and convince them of the seriousness of the age in which we live. From Adam and Eve, we are either on the way to a higher racial existence or racial extermination. This much is known and realized by every thoughtful race and nation. Hence, we have the death struggle of the different races of Europe and Asia in the scramble of the survival of the fittest race. As we look at things, we see that the great world in which we live has undergone much change since the time of creation. When God created the world and all therein, he handed his authority over to the two beings he created in his own image, namely Adam and Eve. From the time of Adam and Eve, the human race has multiplied by leaps and bounds. Where we once had two persons to exercise authority over the world, we today have 1,500,000,000 claiming authority and possession of the same world that was once the property of the two. The tragedy of race extinction. When the colonists of America desired possession of the land, they saw that a weak aboriginal race was in their way. What did they do? They got hold of them, killed them, and buried them underground. This is a fair indication of what will happen to the weaker peoples of the world in another 200 or 300 years, when the stronger races will have developed themselves to the position of complete mastery of all things material. They will not then, as they have not in the past, allow a weak and defenseless race to stand in their way, especially if in their doing so they will endanger their happiness, their comfort, and their pleasures. These are the things that strike the thoughtful Negro as being dangerous. These are the things that cause us who make up the Universal Negro Improvement Association to be fighting tenaciously for the purpose of building up a strong Negro race, so as to make it impossible for us to be exterminated in the future to make room for the stronger races, even as the North American Indian has been exterminated to make room for the great white man on this North American continent. The illiterate and shallow-minded Negro who can see no farther than his nose is now the greatest stumbling block in the way of the race. He tells us that we must be satisfied with our condition, that we must not think of building up a nation of our own, that we must not seek to organize ourselves racially, but that we must depend upon the good feeling of the other fellow for the solution of the problem that now confronts us. This is a dangerous policy, and it is my duty to warn the 400 million Negroes of the world against this kind of leadership. A leadership that will try to make Negroes believe that all will be well without their taking upon themselves the task of bettering their condition politically, industrially, educationally, and otherwise. The time has come for those of us who have the vision of the future to inspire our people to a closer kinship, to a closer love of self, because it is only through this appreciation of self will we be able to rise to that higher life that will make us not an extinct race in the future, but a race of men fit to survive. The price of leadership. Those of us who are blazing the way in this new propaganda of the Universal Negro Improvement Association to enlighten our people everywhere are at times very much annoyed and discouraged by acts of our own people, in that consciously or unconsciously they do so many things to hurt our deeper feeling of loyalty and love for the race. But what can we do? Can we forsake them because they hurt our feelings? Surely not. Painful though it may be to be interfered with and handicapped in the performance of the higher sense of duty, yet we must, martyr-like, make up our minds and our hearts to pay the price of leadership. We must be sympathetic, we must be forgiving, we must really have forbearance, so that when the ignorant and illiterate fellow who happens to be a member of your own race stands up to block the passage of some cause that you believe would be to his benefit and to yours as a people, you will be able to overlook him, even though he fosters his opposition with the greatest amount of insult to your intelligence and to your dignity. The excuse that some of our most brilliant men give for not identifying themselves with race movements is that they cannot tolerate the interference of the illiterate Negro, who, being a member of the same organization, will attempt to dictate what you should do in the interest of the race, when his act is based upon no deeper judgment than his like or dislike for the person he is opposing, or the satisfaction it would give him to embarrass the person he feels like opposing. Many an able leader is lost to his race because of this fear, and sometimes we must admit the reasonableness of this argument. But as I have said, leadership means martyrdom. Leadership means sacrifice. Leadership means giving up one's personality, giving up of everything for the cause that is worthwhile. It is only because of that feeling that I personally continue to lead the Universal Negro Improvement Association, because, like every other leader, I have had to encounter the opposition, the jealousy, the plotting of men who take advantage of the situation simply because they happen to be members of the organization, and that we may have to depend upon their vote one way or the other for the good of the cause. Not that some of us care one row of pins about what the other fellow thinks, but when it is considered that we can only achieve success through harmony and unity, then it can be realized how much one has to sacrifice as a leader for getting that harmony that is necessary to bring about the results that are desired. The white race. We desire harmony and unity today more than ever, because it is only through the bringing together of the 400 million Negroes into one mighty bond that we can successfully pilot our way through the avenues of opposition and the oceans of difficulties that seem to confront us. When it is considered that the great white race is making a Herculean struggle to become the only surviving race of the centuries, and when it is further considered that the great yellow race under the leadership of Japan is making a like struggle, then more than ever the seriousness of the situation can be realized as far as our race is concerned. If we sit supinely by and allow the great white race to lift itself in numbers and in power, it will mean that in another 500 years, this full-grown race of white men will in turn exterminate the weaker race of black men for the purpose of finding enough room on this limited mundane sphere to accommodate that race, which will have numerically multiplied itself into many billions. This is the danger point. What will become of the Negro in another 500 years if he does not organize now to develop and to protect himself? The answer is that he will be exterminated for the purpose of making room for the other races that will be strong enough to hold their own against the opposition of all and sundry. An appeal to the intelligentsia. The leadership of the Negro of today must be able to locate the race, and not only for today but for all times. It is in the desire to locate the Negro in a position of prosperity and happiness in the future that the Universal Negro Improvement Association is making this great fight for the race's emancipation everywhere and the founding of a great African government. Every sober-minded Negro will see immediately the reason why we should support a movement of this kind. If we will survive, then it must be done through our own effort, through our own energy. No race of weaklings can survive in the days of tomorrow. because they will be hard and strenuous days fraught with many difficulties. I appeal to the higher intelligence as well as to the illiterate groups of our race. We must work together. Those of us who are better positioned intellectually must exercise forbearance with the illiterate and help them to see the light. If we happen to be members of the same organization and the illiterate man tries to embarrass you, do not become disgusted, but remember that he does it because he does not know better, and it is your duty to forbear and forgive, because the ends that we serve are not of self, but for the higher development of the entire race. It is on this score, it is on this belief, that I make the sacrifice of self to help this downtrodden race of mine. Nevertheless, I say there is a limit to human patience, and we should not continue to provoke the other fellow against his human feelings, for in doing so we may be but bringing down upon our own heads the pillars of the temple. Africa for the Africans. For 5 years, the Universal Negro Improvement Association has been advocating the cause of Africa for the Africans. That is, that the Negro peoples of the world should concentrate upon the object of building up for themselves a great nation in Africa. When we started our propaganda toward this end, several of the so-called intellectual Negroes who have been bamboozling the race for over half a century said that we were crazy, that the Negro peoples of the Western world were not interested in Africa and could not live in Africa. One editor and leader went so far as to say at his so-called Pan-African Congress that American Negroes could not live in Africa because the climate was too hot. All kinds of arguments have been adduced by these Negro intellectuals against the colonization of Africa by the black race. Some said that the black man would ultimately work out his existence alongside of the white man in countries founded and established by the latter. Therefore, it was not necessary for Negroes to seek an independent nationality of their own. The old-time stories of African fever, African bad climate, African mosquitoes, African savages have been repeated by these brainless intellectuals of ours as a scare against our people in America and the West Indies, taking a kindly interest in the new program of building a racial empire of our own in our motherland. Now that years have rolled by and the Universal Negro Improvement Association has made the circuit of the world with its propaganda, we find eminent statesmen and leaders of the white race coming out boldly advocating the cause of colonizing Africa with the Negroes of the Western world. A year ago, Senator McCallum of the Mississippi legislature introduced a resolution in the House for the purpose of petitioning the Congress of the United States of America and the President to use their good influence in securing from the Allies sufficient territory in Africa in liquidation of the war debt, which territory should be used for the establishing of an independent nation for American Negroes. About the same time, Senator France of Maryland gave expression to a similar desire in the Senate of the United States. During a speech on the soldier's bonus, he said, quote, "We owe a big debt to Africa, and one which we have too long ignored. I need not enlarge upon our peculiar interest in the obligation to the people of Africa. Thousands of Americans have for years been contributing to the missionary work which has been carried out by the noble men and women who have been sent out in the field by the churches of America. Germany to the front. This reveals a real change on the part of prominent statesmen in their attitude on the African question. Then came another suggestion from Germany, for which Dr. Heinrich Schnee, a former governor of German East Africa, is author. This German statesman suggests in an interview given out in Berlin and published in New York that America takes over the mandatories of Great Britain and France in Africa for the colonization of American Negroes. Speaking on the matter, he says, quote, "As regards the attempt to colonize Africa with the surplus American colored population, this would in a long way settle the vexed problem, and under the plan such as Senator France has outlined, might enable France and Great Britain to discharge their duties to the United States, and simultaneously ease the burden of German reparations, which is paralyzing economic life." End quote. With expressions as above quoted from prominent world statesmen, and from the demands made by such men as Senators France and McCallum, it is clear that the question of African nationality is not a far-fetched one, but is as reasonable and feasible as was the idea of an American nationality. A program at last. I trust that the Negro peoples of the world are now convinced that the work of the Universal Negro Improvement Association is not a visionary one, but very practical, and that it is not so far-fetched, but can be realized in a short while if the entire race will only cooperate and work toward the desired end. Now that the work of our organization has started to bear fruit, we find that some of these doubting Thomases of 3 and 4 years ago are endeavoring to mix themselves up with the popular idea of rehabilitating Africa in the interest of the Negro. They are now advancing spurious programs, and in a short while will endeavor to force themselves upon the public as advocates and leaders of the African idea. It is felt that those who have followed the career of the Universal Negro Improvement Association will not allow themselves to be deceived by these Negro opportunists who have always sought to live off the ideas of other people. The dream of a Negro empire. It is only a question of a few more years when Africa will be completely colonized by Negroes, as Europe is by the white race. What we want is an independent African nationality, and if America is to help the Negro peoples of the world establish such a nationality, then we welcome the assistance. It is hoped that when the time comes for American and West Indian Negroes to settle in Africa, they will realize their responsibility and their duty. It will not be to go to Africa for the purpose of exercising an overlordship over the natives, but it shall be the purpose of the Universal Negro Improvement Association to have established in Africa that brotherly cooperation, which will make the interest of the African native and the American and West Indian Negro one and the same. That is to say, we shall enter into a common partnership to build up Africa in the interest of our race. Oneness of interest. Everybody knows that there is absolutely no difference between the native African and the American and West Indian Negroes, in that we are descendants from one common family stock. It is only a matter of accident that we have been divided and kept apart for over 300 years. But it is felt that when the time has come for us to get back together, we shall do so in the spirit of brotherly love, and any Negro who expects that he will be assisted here, there, or anywhere by the Universal Negro Improvement Association to exercise a haughty superiority over the fellows of his own race makes a tremendous mistake. Such men had better remain where they are and not attempt to become in any way interested in the higher development of Africa. The Negro has had enough of the vaunted practice of race superiority as inflicted upon him by others. Therefore, he is not prepared to tolerate a similar assumption on the part of his own people. In America and the West Indies, we have Negroes who believe themselves so much above their fellows as to cause them to think that any readjustment in the affairs of the race should be placed in their hands for them to exercise a kind of autocratic and despotic control as others have done to us for centuries. Again I say, it would be advisable for such Negroes to take their hands and minds off the now popular idea of colonizing Africa in the interest of the Negro race, because their being identified with this new program will not in any way help us because of the existing feeling among Negroes everywhere not to tolerate the infliction of race or class superiority upon them, as is the desire of the self-appointed and self-created race leadership that we have been having for the last 50 years. The basis of an African aristocracy. The masses of Negroes in America, the West Indies, South and Central America are in sympathetic accord with the aspirations of the native Africans. We desire to help them build up Africa as a Negro empire, where every black man, whether he was born in Africa or in the Western world, will have the opportunity to develop on his own lines under the protection of the most favorable democratic institutions. It will be useless, as before stated, for bombastic Negroes to leave America and the West Indies to go to Africa, thinking that they will have privileged positions to inflict upon the race that bastard aristocracy that they have tried to maintain in this Western world at the expense of the masses. Africa shall develop an aristocracy of its own, but it shall be based upon service and loyalty to race. Let all Negroes work toward that end. I feel that it is only a question of a few more years before our program will be accepted, not only by the few statesmen of America who are now interested in it, but by the strong statesmen of the world, as the only solution to the great race problem. There is no other way to avoid the threatening war of the races that is bound to engulf all mankind, which has been prophesied by the world's greatest thinkers. There is no better method than by apportioning every race to its own habitat. The time has really come for the Asiatic to govern themselves in Asia, as the Europeans are in Europe and the Western world. So also is it wise for the Africans to govern themselves at home and thereby bring peace and satisfaction to the entire human family. The future as I see it. It comes to the individual, the race, the nation, once in a lifetime to decide upon the course to be pursued as a career. The hour has now struck for the individual Negro as well as the entire race to decide the course that will be pursued in the interest of our own liberty. We who make up the Universal Negro Improvement Association have decided that we shall go forward, upward, and onward toward the great goal of human liberty. We have determined among ourselves that all barriers placed in the way of our progress must be removed, must be cleared away, for we desire to see the light of a brighter day. The Negro is ready. The Universal Negro Improvement Association for 5 years has been proclaiming to the world the readiness of the Negro to carve out a pathway for himself in the course of life. Men of other races and nations have become alarmed at this attitude of the Negro in his desire to do things for himself and by himself. This alarm has become so universal that organizations have been brought into being here, there, and everywhere for the purpose of deterring and obstructing this forward move of our race. Propaganda has been waged here, there, and everywhere for the purpose of misinterpreting the intention of this organization. Some have said that this organization seeks to create discord and discontent among the races. Some say we are organized for the purpose of hating other people. Every sensible, sane, and honest minded person knows that the Universal Negro Improvement Association has no such intention. We are organized for the absolute purpose of bettering our condition industrially, commercially, socially, religiously, and politically. We are organized not to hate other men, but to lift ourselves and to demand respect of all humanity. We have a program that we believe to be righteous. We believe it to be just, and we have made up our minds to lay down ourselves on the altar of sacrifice for the realization of this great hope of ours, based upon the foundation of righteousness. We declare to the world that Africa must be free, that the entire Negro race must be emancipated from industrial bondage, peonage, and serfdom. We make no compromise. We make no apology in this, our declaration. We do not desire to create offense on the part of other races, but we are determined that we shall be heard, that we shall be given the rights to which we are entitled. The propaganda of our enemies. For the purpose of creating doubts about the work of the Universal Negro Improvement Association, many attempts have been made to cast shadow and gloom over our work. They have even written the most uncharitable things about our organization. They have spoken so unkindly of our effort. But what do we care? They spoke unkindly and uncharitably about all the reform movements that have helped in the betterment of humanity. They maligned the great movement of the Christian religion. They maligned the great liberation movements of America, of France, of England, of Russia. Can we expect then to escape being maligned in this, our desire for the liberation of Africa and the freedom of 400 million Negroes of the world? We have unscrupulous men and organizations working in opposition to us, some trying to capitalize the new spirit that has come to the Negro to make profit out of it to their own selfish benefit. Some are trying to set back the Negro from seeing the hope of his own liberty, and thereby poisoning our people's mind against the motives of our organization. But every sensible, far-seeing Negro in this enlightened age knows what propaganda means. It is the medium of discrediting that which you are opposed to, so that the propaganda of our enemies will be of little avail as soon as we are rendered able to carry to our peoples scattered throughout the world the true message of our great organization. Crocodiles as friends. Men of the Negro race, let me say to you that a greater future is in store for us. We have no cause to lose hope, to become faint-hearted. We must realize that upon ourselves depend our destiny, our future. We must carve out that future, that destiny, and we who make up the Universal Negro Improvement Association have pledged ourselves that nothing in the world shall stand in our way. Nothing in the world shall discourage us, but opposition shall make us work harder, shall bring us closer together, so that as one man, the millions of us will march on toward that goal that we have set for ourselves. The new Negro shall not be deceived. The new Negro refuses to take advice from anyone who has not felt with him and suffered with him. We have suffered for 300 years. Therefore, we feel that the time has come when only those who have suffered with us can interpret our feelings and our spirit. It takes the slave to interpret the feelings of the slave. It takes the unfortunate man to interpret the spirit of his unfortunate brother. And so it takes the suffering Negro to interpret the spirit of his comrade. It is strange that so many people are interested in the Negro now, willing to advise him how to act and what organizations he should join. Yet nobody was interested in the Negro to the extent of not making him a slave for 250 years, reducing him to industrial peonage and serfdom after he was freed. It is strange that the same people can be so interested in the Negro now as to tell him what organization he should follow and what leader he should support. Whilst we are bordering on a future of brighter things, we are also at our danger period, when we must either accept the right philosophy or go down by following deceptive propaganda which has hemmed us in for many centuries. Deceiving the people. There is many a leader of our race who tells us that everything is well and that all things will work out themselves and that a better day is coming. Yes, all of us know that a better day is coming. We all know that one day we will go home to paradise. But whilst we are hoping by our Christian virtues to have an entry into paradise, we also realize that we are living on earth, and that the things that are practiced in paradise are not practiced here. You have to treat this world as the world treats you. We are living in a temporal, material age, an age of activity, an age of racial, national selfishness. What else can you expect but to give back to the world what the world gives to you? And we are calling upon the 400 million Negroes of the world to take a decided stand, a determined stand, that we shall occupy a firm position. That position shall be an emancipated race and a free nation of our own. We are determined that we shall have a free country. We are determined that we shall have a flag. We are determined that we shall have a government second to none in the world. An eye for an eye. Men may spurn the idea, they may scoff at it. The metropolitan press of this country may deride us. Yes, white men may laugh at the idea of Negroes talking about government. But let me tell you, there is going to be a government. And let me say to you also that whatsoever you give, in like measure it shall be returned to you. The world is sinful, and therefore man believes in the doctrine of an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. Everybody believes that revenge is God's, but at the same time we are men, and revenge sometimes springs up, even in the most Christian heart. Why should man write down a history that will react against him? Why should man perpetrate deeds of wickedness upon his brother, which will return to him in like manner? Yes, the Germans maltreated the French in the Franco-Prussian War of 1870, but the French got even with the Germans in 1918. It is history, and history will repeat itself. Beat the Negro, brutalize the Negro, kill the Negro, burn the Negro, imprison the Negro, scoff at the Negro, deride the Negro. It may come back to you one of these fine days, because the supreme destiny of man is in the hands of God. God is no respecter of persons, whether that person be white, yellow or black. Today, the one race is up. Tomorrow it is fallen. Today, the Negro seems to be the footstool of the other races and nations of the world. Tomorrow, the Negro may occupy the highest rung of the great human ladder. But when we come to consider the history of man, was not the Negro a power? Was he not great once? Yes, honest students of history can recall the day when Egypt, Ethiopia, and Timbuktu towered in their civilizations, towered above Europe, towered above Asia, when Europe was inhabited by a race of cannibals, a race of savages, naked men, heathen, and pagans. Africa was peopled with a race of cultured black men who were masters in art, science, and literature, men who were cultured and refined, men who, it was said, were like the gods. Even the great poets of old sang in beautiful sonnets of the delight it afforded the gods to be in companionship with the Ethiopians. Why then should we lose hope? Black men, you were once great, you shall be great again. Lose not courage, lose not faith, and go forward. The thing to do is to get organized. Keep separated and you will be exploited. You will be robbed. You will be killed. Get organized and you will compel the world to respect you. If the world fails to give you consideration because you are black men, because you are Negroes, 400 millions of you shall, through organization, shake the pillars of the universe and bring down creation, even as Samson brought down the temple upon his head and upon the heads of the Philistines. An inspiring vision. So, Negroes, I say, through the Universal Negro Improvement Association, that there is much to live for. I have a vision of the future, and I see before me a picture of a redeemed Africa, with her dotted cities, with her beautiful civilization, with her millions of happy children going to and fro. Why should I lose hope? Why should I give up and take a back place in this age of progress? Remember that you are men, that God created you lords of this creation. Lift up yourselves, men. Take yourselves out of the mire and hitch your hopes to the stars. Yes, rise as high as the very stars themselves. Let no man pull you down. Let no man destroy your ambition, because man is but your companion, your equal. Man is your brother. He is not your Lord. He is not your sovereign master. We of the Universal Negro Improvement Association feel happy. We are cheerful. Let them connive to destroy us. Let them organize to destroy us. We shall fight the more. Ask me personally the cause of my success, and I say opposition. Oppose me, and I fight the more. And if you want to find out the sterling worth of the Negro, oppose him. And under the leadership of the Universal Negro Improvement Association, he shall fight his way to victory. And in the days to come, and I believe not far distant, Africa shall reflect a splendid demonstration of the worth of the Negro, of the determination of the Negro to set himself free and to establish a government of his own. Speech delivered on Emancipation Day at Liberty Hall in New York City, January 1st, 1922. 59 years ago, Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation declaring 4 million Negroes in this country free. Several years prior to that, Queen Victoria of England signed the Emancipation Proclamation that set at liberty hundreds of thousands of West Indian Negro slaves. West Indian Negroes celebrate their emancipation on the first day of August of every year. The American Negroes celebrate their emancipation on the 1st of January of every year. Tonight, we are here to celebrate the emancipation of the slaves in this country. We are the descendants of the men and women who suffered in this country for 250 years under that barbarous, that brutal institution known as slavery. You who have not lost trace of your history will recall the fact that over 300 years ago, your forebears were taken from the great continent of Africa and brought here for the purpose of using them as slaves. Without mercy, without any sympathy, they worked our forebears. They suffered, they bled, they died. But with their sufferings, with their blood, which they shed in their death, they had a hope that one day their posterity would be free, and we are assembled here tonight as the children of their hope. I trust each and every one of you, therefore, will realize that you have a duty which is incumbent upon you, a duty that you must perform, because our forebears who suffered, who bled, who died, had hopes that are not yet completely realized. They hoped that we, as their children, would be free, but they also hoped that their country from whence they came would also be free to their children, their grandchildren, and great-grandchildren at some future time. It is for the freedom of that country, that motherland of ours, that 4.5 million Negroes, as members of the Universal Negro Improvement Association, are laboring today. This race of ours gave civilization, gave art, gave science, gave literature to the world. But it has been the way with races and nations. The one race stands out prominently in the one century or in the one age, and in another century or age it passes off the stage of action, and another race takes its place. The Negro once occupied a high position in the world, scientifically, artistically, and commercially. But in the balancing of the great scale of evolution, we lost our place, and someone other than ourselves occupies the stand we once held. God never intended that man should enslave his fellow, and the price of such a sin or such a violation of heaven's law must be paid by everyone. As for me, because of the blessed past, because of the history that I know, so long as there is within me the breath of life and the Spirit of God, I shall struggle on and urge others of our race to struggle on, to see that justice is done to the black peoples of the world. Yes, we appreciate the sorrows of the past, and we are going to work in the present that the sorrows of our generation shall not be perpetuated in the future. On the contrary, we shall strive that by our labors succeeding generations of our own shall call us blessed, even as we call the generation of the past blessed today. And they indeed were blessed. They were blessed with a patience not yet known to man, a patience that enabled them to endure the tortures and the sufferings of slavery for 250 years. Why? Was it because they loved slavery so? No, it was because they loved this generation more. Isn't it wonderful? Transcendent? What then are you going to show your appreciation of this love? What gratitude are you going to manifest in return for what they have done for you? As for me, knowing the sufferings of my forefathers, I shall give back to Africa that liberty that she once enjoyed hundreds of years ago, before her own sons and daughters were taken from her shores and brought in chains to this Western world. No better gift can I give in honor of the memory of the love of my foreparents for me, and in gratitude of the sufferings They endured that I might be free. No grander gift can I bear to the sacred memory of this generation past than a free and a redeemed Africa, a monument for all eternity, for all times. As by the action of the world, as by the conduct of all races and nations, it is apparent that not one of them has the sense of justice, the sense of love, the sense of equity, the sense of charity that would make men happy and make God satisfied. It is apparent that it is left to the Negro to play such a part in human affairs. For when we look to the Anglo-Saxon, we see him full of greed, avarice, no mercy, no love, no charity. We go from the white man to the yellow man, and we see the same unenviable characteristics in the Japanese. Therefore, we must believe that the psalmist had great hopes of this race of ours when he prophesied, "Princes shall come out of Egypt, and Ethiopia shall stretch forth her hands unto God." If humanity is regarded as made up of the children of God, and God loves all humanity, we all know that, then God will be more pleased with that race that protects all humanity than with the race that outrages the children of God. And so tonight we celebrate this anniversary of our emancipation. We do it not with regret. On the contrary, we do it with an abiding confidence, a hope and faith in ourselves and in our God. And the faith that we have is a faith that will ultimately take us back to that ancient place, that ancient position that we once occupied when Ethiopia was in her glory. Christmas message to the Negro peoples of the world, December 1921. Fellow men of the Negro race, greeting. To us is born this day the child Jesus, the Christ. The shepherds and wise men are now wending their way toward Bethlehem, there to behold the wonder of God, because there in a manger is to be found the baby Christ, who is to be the Redeemer of the world. And so our thoughts go back for more than 1900 years. We hear the shout, "Hosanna in the highest! Blessed is he that cometh in the name of the Lord." With all the preparation the human race has made to welcome into the world the Christ, who is to redeem us, we find ourselves still in confusion, still fighting, still exploiting, still merciless in our onslaught one upon the other. But on this Christmas morn, may we not, all members and brothers of the great human family, forget our differences, and in one glorious chorus sing, put to the world peace, perfect peace. Christ died to free mankind. When we come to consider the brotherhood of man and the fatherhood of God, and that this child of our own flesh, yet spirit of the great Creator, has been sent to link us nearer to our common Father, will we not admit of the reason that there should be but very little differences between us? What will we gain fighting the battle of man against man? Absolutely nothing but death. And was not this child Jesus sent into this world to teach us the new life, the life of love, of charity, the life of mercy? What greater example do we desire than that which he gave in his own life? He suffered, he died that others might be free. Yet even with the great object of the cross before us, even though he died on Mount Calvary to make us free, even though he overcame death, the grave, and hell to demonstrate to us the new life possible to each and every one, we have not yet turned from the path of sin to enter into the glory of his eternal kingdom. The spirit of Christmas, instead of planning a career of sin on this Christmas morning, may we not lift our thoughts to to that grand and noble Father who sent to us on this day his royal Son, whom he has made our brother, and ask him to bless each and every one of us, that our hearts may be touched with the true spirit of the first Christmas morning. That first day in the stable at Bethlehem was a beacon of a newborn hope, for with the birth of the Prince of Peace there came to us an age of spiritual grace, which in its course sought to link man nearer to his God, and coming down the ages for more than 1900 years, we have tried to preach him as he appeared to us in his innocence, his love, and in his charity. Christ labored for 33 years to teach us the way to glory, but in his career, man, his brother, sought the life that he could not give. He persecuted him, he derided him, he jeered him, and at last he crucified him. But when that which was physical in the Christ died, the spiritual continued, and from earth betook its flight to heaven, there, probably for all eternity, to look down upon the sinful, wicked world, and still to shower upon us blessings that we really need. We shall never succeed in taking the Spirit of Christ out of the world, because in some of us still there is that spark of love, charity, and mercy that links us to our God. But may we not ask the great Omnipotent, the great Creator, our eternal Father, to send once more into the world just at this time, and oh, how we pray that it be on this Christmas morn, our brother Christ, so that he may calm the raging storm, and in truth pour out his benediction upon a corrupt world, a soulless human race, and make us subjects fit for eternal life. Hail the newborn King. As with the angels, let us sing, Hail the newborn King, the Prince of Peace. Hail to the Son of Righteousness. For with thee there is life, without thee there is death. For as thou died upon Calvary's mount to make us better, to redeem us from our sins, may we not hope for a continuance of that love even for today? And knowing thee and thy bountiful love for all mankind, may we not further ask that thy Spirit lighten up our hearts and bring to us, by the touch of thy grace, the knowledge of the everlasting brotherhood of man, and the eternal fatherhood of God. As the angels now rejoice in heaven over this new birth, so we rejoice on earth, 400 millions of us who are members of this Negro race, feeling that thou art our King, that thou art our Savior, that thou shalt be our Emmanuel. We love thee because thou art the Son of God. We praise, worship, and adore thee because thou art the Prince of Peace. The Prince of Peace, our God today. Let others in their sin and their wickedness seek after the infant life that thou gavest to all mankind. We in our simplicity shall find refuge for thee even in the land of Egypt. Yes, the world of sinful, wicked men cried out, Crucify him, crucify him. But Lord, because thou art our Master, because thou art our Prince of Peace, because thou art our Redeemer, we shall render unto thee all help possible, even in bearing the cross up the heights of Calvary. For in life thou hast been our friend. In death we know thou shalt remember us. And now that thou art sitting at the right hand of God the Father, now that thou hast conquered death, the grave, and hell, surely in thy mercy thou shalt remember us. So today, even though hundreds of years have rolled by since thy crucifixion, we know that there is in thine heart, there is in thy soul a warm spot for the sons and daughters of Africa, whose forebears bore the cross for thee up the heights of Calvary to thy crucifixion. We sing and shout with the angels, we ring our joy bells, we blow our horns in praise, because thou art indeed the Jesus, the Christ, the Emmanuel to us, the Son of righteousness, the Prince of peace. As sons and daughters of Africa, may not 400 millions of us the world over on this Christmas morn pray for the redemption of that motherland which sheltered our blessed Redeemer when the wild, wicked men of the world sought his life. In the same manner, wild, wicked men seek the lives of Negroes today, and burn, lynch, and kill them, because they have not the strength that makes man mighty. But with the almighty power of God, and with the guidance and mercy of our blessed Lord, we feel that one day Ethiopia shall stretch forth her hand, and whether it be at the second coming or before, we shall sing our hosannas, shout our praises to God for freedom, for liberty, for life. For Christ is born of Mary, and gathered all above. While mortals sleep, the angels keep their watch of wondering love. O morning stars, together proclaim the holy birth, and praises sing to God our King, and peace to men on earth. The Resurrection of the Negro. Easter Sunday Sermon delivered at Liberty Hall, New York City, New York, April 16th, 1922. The Lord is risen. A little over 1900 years ago, a man came to this world called Jesus. He was sent here for the propagation of a cause, that of saving humanity. When he came, the world refused to hear him. The world rejected him. The world persecuted him. Men crucified him. A couple days ago, he was nailed to the cross of Calvary. He died. He was buried. Today, he is risen. Risen, the spiritual leader of creation. Risen as the first fruit of them that slept. Today, that crucified Lord, that crucified Christ, sees the affairs of men from his own spiritual throne on high. After hundreds of years have rolled by, the doctrine he taught has become the accepted religion of hundreds of millions of human beings. He, in his resurrection, triumphed over death and the grave. He, by his resurrection, convinced humanity that his cause was spiritual. The world felt the truth about Jesus too late to have accepted his doctrine in his lifetime. But what was done to Jesus in his lifetime is just what is done to all reformers and reform movements. He came to change the spiritual attitude of man toward his brother. That was regarded in his day as an irregularity, even as it is regarded today. The one who attempts to bring about changes in the order of human society becomes a dangerous impostor upon society and to those who control the systems of the day. The desire to enslave others. It has been an historic attitude of man to keep his brother in slavery, in subjection for the purpose of exploitation. When Jesus came, the privileged few were taking advantage of the unfortunate masses. Because the teaching of Jesus sought to equalize the spiritual and even the temporal rights of man, those who held authority, sway, and dominion sought his liberty by prosecution, sought his life by death. He was called to yield up that life for the cause he loved, because he was indeed a true reformer. The example set by Christ. The example set by our Lord and Master 1900 years ago is but the example that every reformer must make up his mind to follow if we are indeed to serve those to whom we minister. Service to humanity means sacrifice. That has been demonstrated by our blessed Lord and Redeemer, whose resurrection we commemorate this day. As Christ triumphed nearly 2,000 years ago over death in the grave, as he was risen from the dead, so do I hope that 400 million Negroes of today will triumph over the slavishness of the past, intellectually, physically, morally, and even religiously. That on this anniversary of our risen Lord, we ourselves will be risen from the slumber of the ages, risen in thought to higher ideals, to a loftier purpose, to a truer conception of life. The hope of the UNIA. It is the hope of the Universal Negro Improvement Association that the 400 million Negroes of the world will get to realize that we are about to live new life, a risen life, a life of knowing ourselves. How many of us know ourselves? How many of us understand ourselves? The major number of us for ages have failed to recognize in ourselves the absolute masters of our own destiny, the absolute directors and creators of our own fate. Today, as we think of our risen Lord, may we not also think of the life he gave to us, the life that made us his instruments, his children, the life that he gave to us, make us possessors of the land that he himself created through his Father. How many of us can reach out to that higher life, that higher purpose, that creative world that says to you, you are a man, a sovereign, a Lord, Lord of the creation? On this beautiful spring day, may we not realize that God made nature for us. God has given it to us as our province, our dominion. May we not realize that God has created no superior being to us in this world, but himself? May we not know that we are the true lords and creators of our own fate and of our own physical destiny? The work of the Universal Negro Improvement Association for the past 4.5 years has been that of guiding us to realize that there should be a resurrection in us, and if at no other time, I trust that at this Easter tide we will realize that there is a great need for a resurrection from the lethargy of the past, the sleep of the past, from that feeling that made us accept the idea and opinion that God intended that we should occupy an inferior place in the world. No superiority or inferiority. Men and women of Liberty Hall, men and women of my race, do you know that the God we love, the God we adore, the God who sent his Son to this world nearly 2,000 years ago, never created an inferior man? That God we love, that God we worship and adore, has created man in his own image, equal in every respect, wheresoever he may be. Let him be white, let him be yellow, let him be red, let him be black. God has created him the equal of his brother. He is such a loving God. He is such a merciful God. He is such a God that he is no respecter of persons, that he would not in his great love create a superior race and an inferior one. The God that you worship is a God that expects you to be the equal of other men. The God that I adore is such a God, and he could be no other. Some of us seem to accept the fatalist position, the fatalist attitude that God accorded to us a certain position and condition, and therefore there is no need trying to be otherwise. The moment you accept such an attitude, the moment you accept such an opinion, the moment you harbor such an idea, you hurl an insult at the great God who created you, because you question him for his love. You question him for his mercy. God has created man and has placed him in this world as the Lord of the creation, as the sovereign of everything that you see. Let it be land, let it be sea, let it be the lakes, rivers, and everything therein. All that you see in creation, all that you see in the world, was created by God for the use of man. And you, 400 million black souls, have as much right to your possession in this world as any other race. Created in the image of the same God, we have the same common rights. And today, I trust that there will be a spiritual and material resurrection among Negroes everywhere, that you will lift yourselves from the doubts of the past, that you will lift yourselves from the slumbers of the past, that you will lift yourselves from the lethargy of the past, and strike out in this new life, in this resurrected life, to see things as they are. See life as others see it. The Universal Negro Improvement Association desires that the 400 million members of our race see life as the other races see it. The great white race sees life in an attitude of sovereignty. The great yellow race sees life in a similar way. That is to say that man, let him be white or yellow, sees that he is master and owner and possessor of everything that God has created in this world and given to us in nature. And that is why, by knowing himself, by understanding himself, and by understanding his God, man has gone throughout the length and breadth of this world, conquering the very elements, harnessing nature, and making a servant of everything that God placed within his reach. As he has done that for thousands of years, pleasing God and justifying his existence, so we are appealing to the members of our race to do that now in this risen life. And if you have never made up your minds before, I trust on this Easter Sunday you will do so. Masters of your own destiny. I repeat that God created you masters of your own destiny, masters of your own fate, and you can pay no higher tribute to your divine master than function as a man, as he created you. The highest compliment we can pay to our Creator, the highest respect we can pay to our risen Lord and Savior, is that of feeling that he has created us as his masterpiece, his perfect instruments of his own existence, because in us is reflected the very being of God. When it is said that we are created in his own image, we ourselves reflect his greatness. We ourselves reflect the part of God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Ghost. And when we allow ourselves to be subjected and create others as our superior, we hurl an insult at our Creator, who made us in the fullness of ourselves. I trust that you will so live today as to realize that you are masters of your own destiny, masters of your fate. If there is anything you want in this world, it is for you to strike out with confidence and faith in self and reach for it, because God has created it for your happiness, wheresoever you may find it in nature. Nature is bountiful, nature is resourceful, and nature is willing to obey the command of man. Man, the sovereign Lord, man who is supposed to hold dominion and take possession of this great world of ours. The difference between the strong and weak races. The difference between the strong and weak races is that the strong races seem to know themselves, seem to discover themselves, seem to realize and know fully that there is but a link between them and the Creator, that above them there is no other but God, and anything that bears human form is but their equal in standing, and to that form there should be no obeisance, there should be no regard for superiority. Because of that feeling, they have been able to hold their own in this world. They have been able to take care of the situation as it confronts them in nature. But because of our lack of faith and confidence in ourselves, we have caused others, created in a like image to ourselves, to take advantage of us for hundreds of years. For hundreds of years, we have been the footstool of other races and nations of the earth simply because we have failed to realize, recognize, and know ourselves as other men have known themselves, and felt that there is nothing in the world that is above them except the influence of God. The understanding that others have gotten out of life is the same understanding that 400 million Negroes must get out of this existence of ours. I pray that a new inspiration will come to us as a race, that we will think of nature as our servant, that we will think of man as our partner through life, and go through the length and breadth of this world achieving and doing as other men, as other nations, and other races. Speech delivered at Liberty Hall in New York City during the Second International Convention of Negroes, August 1921. 4 years ago, realizing the oppression and the hardships from which we suffered, we organized ourselves into an organization for the purpose of bettering our condition and founding a government of our own. The 4 years of organization have brought good results, in that from an obscure, despised race, we have grown into a mighty power, a mighty force whose influence is being felt throughout the length and breadth of the world. The Universal Negro Improvement Association existed but in name 4 years ago. Today, it is known as the greatest moving force among Negroes. We have accomplished this through unity of effort and unity of purpose. It is a fair demonstration of what we will be able to accomplish in the very near future when the millions who are outside the pale of the Universal Negro Improvement Association will have linked themselves up with us. By our success of the last 4 years, we will be able to estimate the grander success of a free and redeemed Africa. In climbing the heights to where we are today, we have had to surmount difficulties. We have had to climb over obstacles, but the obstacles were stepping stones to the future greatness of this cause we represent. Day by day, we are writing a new history, recording new deeds of valor performed by this race of ours. It is true that the world has not yet valued us at our true worth, but we are climbing up so fast and with such force that every day the world is changing its attitude toward us. Wheresoever you turn your eyes today, you will find the moving influence of the Universal Negro Improvement Association among Negroes from all corners of the globe. We hear among Negroes the cry of Africa for the Africans. This cry has become a positive, determined one. It is a cry that is raised simultaneously the world over because of the universal oppression that affects the Negro. You who are congregated here tonight as delegates representing the hundreds of branches of the Universal Negro Improvement Association in different parts of the world will realize that we in New York are positive ill this great desire of a free and redeemed Africa. We have established this Liberty Hall as the center from which we send out the sparks of liberty to the four corners of the globe. And if you have caught the spark in your section, we want you to keep it burning for the great cause we represent. There is a mad rush among races everywhere toward national independence. Everywhere we hear the cry of liberty, of freedom, and a demand for democracy. In our corner of the world, we are raising the cry for liberty, freedom, and democracy. Men who have raised the cry for freedom and liberty in ages past have always made up their minds to die for the realization of the dream. We who are assembled in this convention as delegates representing the Negroes of the world give out the same spirit that the fathers of liberty in this country gave out over 100 years ago. We give out a spirit that knows no compromise, a spirit that refuses to turn back, a spirit that says liberty or death. And in prosecution of this great ideal, the ideal of a free and redeemed Africa, men may scorn, men may spurn us, and may say that we are on the wrong side of life. But let me tell you, that way in which you are traveling is just the way all peoples who are free have traveled in the past. If you want liberty, you yourselves must strike the blow. If you must be free, you must become so through your own effort, through your own initiative. Those who have discovered you in the past are those who have enslaved you for centuries, and it is not expected that they will admit that you have a right to strike out at this late hour for freedom, liberty, and democracy. At no time in the history of the world for the last 500 years was there ever a serious attempt made to free Negroes. We have been camouflaged into believing that we were made free by Abraham Lincoln, that we were made free by Victoria of England. But up to now, we are still slaves. We are industrial slaves. We are social slaves. We are political slaves. And the new Negro desires a freedom that has no boundary, no limit. We desire a freedom that will lift us to the common standard of all men, whether they be white men of Europe or yellow men of Asia. Therefore, in our desire to lift ourselves to that standard, we shall stop at nothing until there is a free and redeemed Africa. I understand that just at this time, while we are endeavoring to create public opinion and public sentiment in favor of a free Africa, that others of our race are being subsidized to turn the attention of the world toward a different desire on the part of Negroes. But let me tell you that we who make up this organization know no turning back. We have pledged ourselves even unto the last drop of our sacred blood that Africa must be free. The enemy may argue with you to show you the impossibility of a free and redeemed Africa, but I want you to take as your argument the 13 colonies of America that once owed their sovereignty to Great Britain. That sovereignty has been destroyed to make a United States of America. George Washington was not God Almighty. He was a man like any Negro in this building. And if he and his associates were able to make a free America, we too can make a free Africa. Hampton, Gladstone, Pitt, and Disraeli were not the representatives of God in the person of Jesus Christ. They were but men, but in their time they worked for the expansion of the British Empire, and today they boast of a British Empire upon which the sun never sets. As Pitt and Gladstone were able to work for the expansion of the British Empire, so you and I can work for the expansion of a great African empire. Voltaire and Mirabeau were not Jesus Christ. They were but men like ourselves. They worked and overturned the French monarchy. They worked for the democracy which France now enjoys. And if they were able to do that, we are able to work for a democracy in Africa. Lenin and Trotsky were not Jesus Christ, but they were able to overthrow the despotism of Russia, and today they have given to the world a social republic, the first of its kind. If Lenin and Trotsky were able to do that for Russia, you and I can do that for Africa. Therefore, let no man, let no power on earth turn you from this sacred cause of liberty. I prefer to die at this moment rather than not to work for the freedom of Africa. If liberty is good for certain sets of humanity, it is good for all. Black men, colored men, Negroes have as much right to be free as any other race that God Almighty ever created. And we desire freedom that is unfettered, freedom that is unlimited, freedom that will give us a chance and opportunity to rise to the fullest of our ambition, and that we cannot get in countries where other men rule and dominate. We have reached the time when every minute, every second must count for something done, something achieved in the cause of Africa. We need the freedom of Africa now. Therefore, we desire the kind of leadership that will give it to us as quickly as possible. You will realize that not only individuals but governments are using their influence against us. But what do we care about the unrighteous influence of any government? Our cause is based upon righteousness, and anything that is not righteousness we have no respect for, because God Almighty is our leader and Jesus Christ our standard bearer. We rely on them for the kind of leadership that will make us free. For it is the same God who inspired the psalmist to write, "Princes shall come out of Egypt, and Ethiopia shall stretch out her hands unto God." At this moment, I see Ethiopia stretching forth her hands unto God, and I see the angel of God taking up the standard of the red, the black, and the green, and saying, Men of the Negro race, men of Ethiopia, follow me. Tonight, we are following. We are following 400 million strong. We are following with a determination that we must be free before the wreck of matter, before the crash of worlds. It falls to our lot to tear off the shackles that bind Mother Africa. Can you do it? You did it in the Revolutionary War. You did it in the Civil War. You did it at the battles of the Marne and Verdun. You did it in Mesopotamia. You can do it marching up the battle heights of Africa. Let the world know that 400 million Negroes are prepared to die or live as free men. Despise us as much as you care. Ignore us as much as you care. We are coming 400 million strong. We are coming with our woes behind us, with the memory of suffering behind us. Woes and suffering of 300 years. They shall be our inspiration. My bulwark of strength in the conflict for freedom in Africa will be the 300 years of persecution and hardship left behind in this Western Hemisphere. The more I remember the suffering of my forefathers, the more I remember the lynchings and burnings in the southern states of America, the more I will fight on, even though the battle seems doubtful. Tell me that I must turn back, and I laugh you to scorn. Go on, climb ye the heights of liberty, and cease not in well-doing until you have planted the banner of the red, the black, and the green on the hilltops of Africa. Statement on Arrest, January 1922. I believe that true justice is to be found in the conscience of the people, and when one is deprived of it by the machinations and designs of the corrupt, there can be no better tribunal of appeal than that of public opinion, which gives voice to conscience, and that is why I now appeal to the conscience of the American people for justice. I believe that all races have their peculiar characteristics. The Jew fights the Jew, the Irish fights the Irish, the Italian fights the Italian, and so we have the Negro fighting the Negro. As a Negro, schooled in the Academy of Adversity with the majority of my race, I have ever had a wholesale desire to work for the race's uplift. Recently out of slavery, we have had but a meager chance to rise to the higher heights of human development as a people. At emancipation, we were flung upon the civilized world without a program. Unlike the Irish and the Jew, we had no national aspiration of our own. We were left to the tender mercies of philanthropists and humanitarians who helped us to the best of their ability. In the Negro struggle to get somewhere, every member of the race took a selfish course, all his own. There was no group program or group interest. The only cause that held us together as a people was religion. During the days of slavery, religion was the only consolation of the Negro, and then it was given to him by his masters. Immediately after the emancipation, when the Negro was thrown back upon his own resources, the illiterate racist preacher took charge of us, and with the eye of selfishness, he exploited the zeal of the religious. Our emotions were worked upon by our illiterate preacher, leaders of the early days. The masses of us, having found new employment for which we received pay, were able to contribute to the partial upkeep of our own church life, thus making it profitable for the preachers of our race to exploit us in the name of God, without giving us a program by which we could redeem ourselves. After the illiterate preacher, leader, came the illiterate race politician, who also had no program for the higher temporal development of the race. He, like the preacher, had his selfish plans of using and feeding upon the emotions of the people. These two illiterate parasites, who extracted all that was worthwhile from the people, traveled hand in hand until we reached the first milestone of higher intelligence. Then the illiterate preacher and politician had to give way to a more intelligent class, who, unfortunately, with only a few exceptions scattered here and there, followed and are still following in the footsteps of the old preachers and politicians to plunder and exploit the masses because they had no vision. And now I come to the source of my troubles. In fighting the battles of the masses, I come to the people in the role of the reformer and say to them, "Awake, the day is upon you. Go forth in the name of the race and build yourselves a nation. Redeem your country, Africa, the land from whence you came, and prove yourselves men worthy of the recognition of others." This is the offense I have committed against the selfish Negro preachers and politicians who have for more than half a century waxed fat at the expense of the people. The shout goes up. We cannot allow Garvey to preach his reformation and expose us to the people. The people will become too wise. We will lose our standing among them, and they will not support us. We must get Garvey. We must discredit him before the people. We cannot do it ourselves because we have no power. We will frame him up. We will lay traps for him. We will state all manner of charges against him to the various departments of government so that the government will prosecute him for us. Such have been the ravings, machinations, and designs of a certain class of Negro politicians and preachers against me because of my reform work of 3.5 years among my people that has over 4 million followers. Jews, Irish, and reformers of all races have had their troubles and trials with their own people, so I am satisfied to bear the persecution of my own that they might be free. I trust no one from the people would believe that I could be so mean as to defraud a fellow Negro, either directly or indirectly. I have an ideal that is far above money, and that is to see my people really free. Others of my race oppose me because they fear my influence among the people, and they judge me from their own corrupt, selfish consciences. There is an old adage that says, "A thief does not like to see another man carrying a long bag," and thus the dishonest ones of our preachers and politicians, believing that I am of their stamp, try to embarrass me by framing me up with the law. I have had to dismiss from the employ of the association and caused the arrest of many dishonest preachers and politicians, and now their fraternities are out for revenge. Poor misguided mortals, how can they, when the conscience and soul of a man cannot be incriminated from without? The Negro ministry needs purging, and with the help of God and the people, we shall in a short while show to the world a new race by the purification of those who lead. I desire to say that I have a great amount of confidence in several of the preachers and politicians of my race today, but the great majority need purging, because among them we have gamblers, thieves, rogues, vagabonds, and these are the ones who are fighting me at this time. Closing regret. There has never been a movement where the leader has not suffered for the cause and not received the ingratitude of the people. I, like the rest, am prepared for the consequence. The following preamble to the Constitution of the organization was written by the founder and speaks for itself. The Universal Negro Improvement Association and African Communities League is a social, friendly, humanitarian, charitable, educational, institutional, constructive, and expansive society, and is founded by persons desiring to the utmost to work for the general uplift of the Negro peoples of the world, and the members pledge themselves to do all in their power to conserve the rights of their noble race and to respect the rights of all mankind, believing always in the brotherhood of man and the fatherhood of God. The motto of the organization is "One God, one aim, one destiny." Therefore, let justice be done to all mankind, realizing that if the strong oppresses the weak, confusion and discontent will ever mark the path of man, but with love, faith, and charity towards all, the reign of peace and plenty will be heralded into the world, and the generations of men shall be called blessed. End of Philosophy and Opinions of Marcus Garvey, edited by Amy Jacques Garvey.